Checklist for Post-Racialist, ? I'm Chris Cowden. I'm the Director of Women in Their Work, and we're really pleased to have you all here. We are live streaming, so many people will be able to see it in addition to ourselves. I'm going to introduce Lauren Woods. It's going to be my great pleasure to do that, and then she will introduce our esteemed panel members. Lauren received her master's from the San Francisco Art Institute. She has pages of accomplishments on her resume, including over a dozen residencies and over a dozen awards, including the Puffin Award, the Creative Capital Award from New York, and the top listing one being the Tribeca Film Institute Media Arts Fellowship. She is living in Dallas now and working on a project which is so intriguing. It's going to launch in February. It is at the Dallas County Records building, where a plaque fell off of a wall that had been there for years, and behind the wall it revealed a whites only painted over a drinking fountain. And so she is working on an installation to call attention to this history in Dallas. So join me in welcoming Lauren Woods.
Thank you. Okay, so Checklist for the Post-Racialist is the title of this roundtable. I'm hoping that, it's not only just a panel discussion amongst ourselves, but I'm hoping that, you guys will come in and give us your thoughts and questions and things. So I decided to try to put together this panel because I'm about to, make this really personal. I said I didn't want to make this a therapy session, but really I put it together because it's an idea and a topic that I think about a lot. When I was getting the work together for this show, Notes of a Native Daughter, I had recently went back to the ideas of James Baldwin. He has a book that was published last year called Cross of the Redemption, which is the first published book of his uncollected writings. And previously in my 20s, I didn't really identify with his writing. It wasn't, it was too poetic for the time period that I was in and the stage I was in. And so now, rereading it, I find myself wanting to highlight and flag every one of his words. It just seemed like he was so on fire. And it, was amazing to me how 50 years later, his words are still resonating, and so I thought about, okay, I have this show with 5 of my works over a period of 5 years. And so as a nod to him and his first book that kind of put him on the map, Notes of a Native Son, I titled the show Notes of a Native Daughter. Not only because I consider it my own little collection of biographic essays the way his novel was, but also because James Baldwin was able to articulate something that I haven't been able to say in public about my work, which is a question that I think many Black artists come to when it's time to talk about your work in the mainstream, and that's how not to just throw your work into the "it's about Blackness" box. So we're here at this, I'm talking about this show, and I was on the phone with a friend from Senegal, and we somehow got into the idea of post-race. And I'm talking from the whole, it's BS, it's total, whatever. And finally he admitted to me, well, I don't think it's BS. I actually think it's a very real thing. I think we're entering into the post-racial era. And I was sort of thrown off because it was the first Black person I had met that admitted out loud that there's such thing as post-racialness and we're actually in it. So his response to me was, well, how else do you mark this time period we're in? Because, race is so modern. And I was like, modern, And I was like, okay, so we're in postmodern time, and how is it how do we mark this period where we have a, Black president who is a very influential world leader? North Korea, Pakistan has nuclear weapons. China is a superpower. The times do look different than early in classical modernity. So that's sort of how I, was kind of wanting to gauge and put this panel together to talk about these ideas, and also sort of to go back and forth to the ideas that Baldwin presents on race, on whiteness, on how how to build a successful multi-ethnic society. So, with that said, that's how let's go. I would like to introduce our panelists tonight. First, I'll start with Mr. Marcel Salas, who drove up from San Antonio. Mr. Salas is a civil rights activist, and I think this is so interesting. He's a civil rights activist turned politician, turned UT professor in history, African American studies. I believe you have a degree in engineering. And he also is a novelist, and he wrote this book called Frankenstein, The Dawning and the Passing, which is a sequel to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, but it's set in 2351, I believe. So it starts out sci-fi, and then it's very, very detailed and goes back into sort of what happens after, what happens to the creature and as he lives on, and what happens after that. So it's really interesting. And let's see, he was elected to the City Council of San Antonio in 1997, where he served 2 full terms as representative for District 2. As I said, he's now a professor of history and in the African American Studies Department at UT San Antonio. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Joni Jones. And many of you know her. She is the director of the John L. Moore Field Center for African and African American Studies, and associate professor of performance studies in the Department of African and African Diaspora Studies at UT. She specializes in performance scholarship that focuses on identity, ethnography, Yoruba-based performance aesthetics, Black feminisms, and theater for social change. And her work is documented in her co-edited volume called Experiments in a Jazz Aesthetic. So I think it's really interesting that she is, a performing artist in this space, and so I have many questions about the idea of the body and how it works in this discussion. I'd like to next introduce Dr. Cherise Smith. Cherise Smith is the Associate Professor in the Department of Art and Art History at UT. Her manuscript, Enacting Others, Identity, Performance, and Works by Eleanor Anton, Nikki S. Lee, Adrian Piper, and Anna DeVere Smith, has been published this year, right? And so she has a chapter actually in here about post-race, so I'm very curious to hear her ideas on the topic. It examines how identity is negotiated in performance art by reading closely a performance work by each artist in which she takes on the characteristics and manners of a racial, ethnic, and gender other. She interprets the work as public actions against social conventions and private acts of self-fashioning, and considers the political implications of occupying the liminal space of being self and other simultaneously. And let's see, next I'll introduce William Cordova. He's here from Dallas. He's not from Dallas, but he drove down from Dallas. He's currently an artist in residence at Central Track, which is UTD's satellite artist in residence space. Born in Lima, Peru, now based in Miami. He's exhibited internationally. His work is sort of multidisciplinary, involving ideas of landscape, architecture, and marginalized history. And let's see, William's work, the fluency in which Cordova traverses media and remixes cultural signifiers confirms his visual multilingualism, not my quote, as hard as it is in lived in Peru, I believe it said. Okay. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jennifer Fuller. She is a professor at UT in the Center for African and African American Studies and the Radio, Television, Film Department. She's a media historian whose research focuses on race, gender, and national identity. In particular, she is interested in representations of Blackness throughout the history of broadcasting and cable news, cable TV. Okay. And I found her work online. There's a couple of interesting books that I find interesting. She writes about the reemergence of civil rights melodramas in the 1990s, and she sort of analyzed that. So I found those writings interesting. And what's the name of the anthology that appears in? Do you remember?
The Civil Rights Movement in American Memory?
Yes. And she also has some interesting articles on the Flow website, which is YouTube media, sort of online blog that I found that I thought were really interesting. So I hope she talks about some of those ideas that she wrote about in that forum. And lastly, we had Maganthrie, Pillay, and Dingi and Ntuli, a filmmaking power couple, recently moved to Austin, so they're new to Austin, and from South Africa, right? Did you move directly from South Africa? Okay. So they're...
Via Atlanta.
Oh, through Atlanta.
You have to go by.
You have to go through Atlanta to get
If you take the Delta, direct flight.
an interesting new millennium port from...
Yeah.
And both of you were born in South Africa. You were raised in England.
No, I'm not raised there. I went to exile when I was quite young, about what I did and my parents did. And they said, come, and I had no choice.
Okay. Okay. So Maganthrie is a director, producer, and Dingi's worked in TV and film in the UK. He happened to produce the first film directed by a black woman, I was told, called Welcome to the Terror Dome. And he's also a writer. And Maganthrie, she made history when she became the first black woman to direct a dramatic feature film in South Africa entitled 34 South, which was a film you guys did together. And the film has shown at film festivals locally and internationally. They both are human rights activists, media activists, and they have a group called FilmNet Nation that is sort of looking at how to transform the areas of media and distribution, sort of grassroots. And yeah, so I think that